Nobody expected it to be just 2 words. No lengthy statement, no carefully crafted message run through PR teams, no strategic timing to maximize impact. Just 2 words dropped on social media that somehow managed to expose more about the WNBA's internal culture than months of interviews, debates, and media coverage ever could. When Caitlin Clark landed one of the most prestigious opportunities in basketball history, joining NBC's flagship NBA coverage alongside Hall of Famers and legends, the reaction from her own league was deafening silence. Veterans who never miss a chance to comment suddenly had nothing to say. Media voices who love to contextualize every achievement avoided the topic entirely. The basketball world celebrated, but inside the WNBA, there was an uncomfortable quiet that felt impossible to ignore until Aaliyah Boston stepped forward with a reaction so simple, so immediate, and so genuine that it completely flipped the narrative. Those 2 words weren't just support for a teammate. They were a mirror held up to an entire league struggling with insecurity, ego politics, and a cultural problem that's been quietly festering for years. While most players chose calculated silence or passive-aggressive distance, Aaliyah chose something different. She chose confidence over insecurity, progress over politics, and authenticity over performance. Her reaction didn't just congratulate Caitlin Clark. It exposed everyone who couldn't bring themselves to do the same. And to understand why this moment matters so much, why it revealed deep fractures in how the league handles star power, and why it says everything about the Indiana Fever's future, you need to understand what Caitlin actually walked into with NBC. Because this wasn't just another feel-good opportunity or a symbolic gesture meant to generate headlines. This was something the WNBA has never fully figured out how to handle. And Aaliyah Boston's instant reaction proves she understands what so many others clearly don't. When people hear that Caitlin Clark is joining NBC as an NBA analyst, some might assume it's a publicity stunt, a symbolic crossover moment designed to generate buzz and headlines. That assumption couldn't be more wrong. NBC doesn't hand out seats on its flagship NBA broadcasts as favors or marketing gimmicks. This isn't a casual guest appearance tucked into a quiet studio show during the off-season. This is Basketball Night in America, one of the most visible and scrutinized stages the sport has to offer. The audience isn't niche, the expectations aren't soft, and the people sitting next to her aren't there because of hype or social media followings. They're there because they've earned credibility over decades of playing and analyzing the game at the highest level. Caitlin Clark is stepping into a space normally reserved for retired legends, not active players, and especially not players from outside the NBA ecosystem. That alone makes this historic. But what really makes it uncomfortable for some people is what it signals about her standing in basketball. NBC didn't just invite Caitlin because she's popular or because she moves the needle with casual fans. They brought her in because they genuinely believe she can analyze the game at an elite level, communicate it clearly to millions of viewers, and hold her own next to names like Carmelo Anthony, Dwyane Wade, and Vince Carter without looking out of place. Networks don't take risks on live television, especially not on their flagship programming. If Caitlin struggled or appeared unprepared, it wouldn't just reflect poorly on her. It would damage the network's credibility and brand. The fact that NBC is confident enough to place her in that chair tells you everything about how they view her basketball IQ, her communication skills, and her value to the sport. This isn't validation from women's basketball circles or WNBA media. This is validation from the highest level of basketball media, period. The NBA side of the sport isn't afraid to say what the WNBA often dances around. Caitlin Clark isn't just a star within her league or a player who generated hype during college. She's one of the most recognizable, bankable, and knowledgeable figures in basketball right now. And other leagues and platforms have no hesitation embracing that reality. Golf events invite her. National brands build campaigns around her. NBA broadcasts want her voice. They don't downplay it. They don't qualify it with disclaimers. And they don't worry about who might feel threatened by the recognition. They simply acknowledge what's obvious to everyone watching. Before we go further, if you're enjoying this breakdown of what really happened and want to see more content that cuts through the noise to show you what's actually going on in basketball, make sure you hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss the next video. Now let's talk about what happened after this announcement dropped, because the silence from inside the WNBA was louder than any criticism could have been. When Caitlin Clark's NBC deal became public, there was no shortage of reaction across the basketball world. NBA analysts praised it as a natural progression for someone with her basketball mind. Fans celebrated it across social media platforms. Major sports outlets framed it as a historic moment for women's basketball and cross-league recognition. But inside the WNBA, that's where things got uncomfortable. Because what followed wasn't outrage or congratulations. It was absence. Timelines that are usually filled with commentary about league happenings suddenly felt empty. Voices that never miss an opportunity to weigh in on WNBA conversations, especially those involving recognition and opportunity, went completely still. No reposts amplifying the news, no shout-outs celebrating a fellow player's achievement, no simple happy for her messages tucked into Instagram captions. Just quiet. And in professional sports, where athletes are constantly active on social media and quick to support teammates and peers, silence is rarely accidental. It's a choice. This wasn't one or two players choosing not to comment on something that didn't interest them. It was a noticeable pattern, especially among veterans who have spent the last 2 seasons openly debating Caitlin Clark's impact on the league, her role in changing the WNBA's visibility, and whether the attention she receives is proportional to her contributions. These same players had no problem speaking up loudly when conversations centered around pay disputes, media coverage, imbalances, or narratives they felt were unfair to the league's established stars. But when Caitlin crossed into NBA media territory and earned institutional recognition on one of basketball's biggest stages, the energy shifted dramatically. The usual voices went dark. That's because moments like this force people to confront something they've been trying to avoid for months. It's one thing to argue about hype during a rookie season, or debate whether media coverage is excessive. It's another thing entirely to watch a player earn validation from institutions outside the league, institutions that don't operate on feelings or politics, but on credibility, expertise, and market value. This NBC deal wasn't about scoring averages, ticket sales, or social media metrics. It wasn't even really about popularity in the traditional sense. It was about trust. Caitlin wasn't just being discussed or praised. She was being trusted to represent the game of basketball at the highest level, trusted to speak intelligently to millions of viewers, and trusted to sit alongside legends without diminishing the broadcast credibility. That kind of institutional trust hits differently, and it's much harder to dismiss or explain away. Aaliyah Boston didn't wait. She didn't sit back to gauge how the rest of the league would respond or check the temperature of social media before deciding whether to comment. She didn't run her reaction through a PR filter or craft a carefully worded statement designed to appeal to everyone while offending no one. The news dropped, and almost immediately her reaction followed. 2 words, 1 emoji, no explanation needed, and somehow it landed louder than every silent timeline combined. In an era where athletes are trained to over-explain everything, to soften their opinions with qualifiers, and to carefully manage every public statement to avoid potential backlash, Aaliyah did the exact opposite. She kept it short, decisive, and unmistakably supportive. There was no ambiguity in her response, no room for misinterpretation or reading between the lines. It wasn't a strategic post calculated for maximum engagement or designed to position herself in a certain light. It was instinctive, genuine, and immediate. That's precisely why it mattered so much. Because anyone can write a carefully crafted congratulatory message after the dust settles and public opinion has already formed. Anyone can support something once it's universally accepted and safe to endorse. But reacting instantly, without hesitation or calculation, tells you exactly how someone really feels in that moment. And Aaliyah Boston felt proud. That 2-word response didn't just congratulate Caitlin Clark on a career achievement, it shut down an entire narrative that's been circulating inside the league for the past 2 years. The idea that supporting Caitlin somehow comes at the expense of your own status and recognition, that celebrating her success means diminishing your own achievements, or admitting that you're somehow lesser, that giving her credit for changing the league's visibility means taking credit away from everyone who came before. Aaliyah made it crystal clear that wasn't how she saw it, and she didn't need paragraphs to make that point. What made the moment even more powerful was how effortless and subtle it was. She didn't call anyone out by name. She didn't criticize the silence from other players. She didn't frame herself as morally superior or more evolved than her peers. She simply showed what genuine support looks like without turning it into a performance piece or using it as an opportunity to talk about herself. And fans noticed immediately. Because in a league where reactions to Caitlin Clark are often filtered through layers of insecurity, competition, and careful political positioning, authenticity stands out like a spotlight in darkness. If Aaliyah Boston had wanted to feel a certain way about Caitlin Clark's success, nobody could have blamed her. The 2024 season put her in a position that most stars quietly resent, even if they never say it publicly. Expectations shifted overnight when injury struck. The pressure multiplied exponentially. The safety net disappeared completely, and suddenly, the responsibility of carrying an entire franchise, of keeping playoff hopes alive, of answering to media and fans about why things weren't working, landed squarely on her shoulders. Caitlin Clark, the player the entire offensive system was supposed to revolve around, the gravity that pulled defenders out of position and created space for everyone else, wasn't there. Injuries don't just remove production from a stat sheet, they remove rhythm, chemistry, identity, and the structural foundation that makes everything else function smoothly. When Caitlin went down, the Indiana Fever didn't just lose points and assists, they lost the player who warped defenses simply by stepping on the court. The spacing collapsed, the burden moved inward, straight onto Aaliyah, and there was nowhere to hide from it. Night after night, game after game, she became the focal point in ways that don't get highlighted on national television or celebrated in viral highlight packages. More touches in the post, more double teams collapsing on her, more defensive attention focused solely on stopping her, more expectations to stabilize a team dealing with chaos and uncertainty, and she answered every single time. She didn't miss games. She didn't hide from the moment when things got uncomfortable. She didn't disappear when the losses piled up, or when critics questioned whether the team could survive without its star guard. She showed up every night, absorbed the physical punishment that comes with being the only offensive threat defenses have to respect, and kept the Fever competitive in a season that could have easily spiraled into complete disaster. That's the part that matters most when evaluating her reaction to Caitlin's NBC deal. Because this is usually where resentment grows in professional sports. This is where players start doing quiet math in their heads, comparing who's getting the spotlight with who's actually taking the hits, who's being talked about on national broadcasts, while who's doing the grinding, physical, thankless work that keeps the team afloat. Those thoughts don't always turn into public criticism or dramatic locker room blow-ups, but they don't just disappear either. They sit there, festering beneath the surface, especially when the player sidelined by injury continues to land major opportunities, endorsement deals, and national recognition while you're fighting through double teams and carrying the load every single night. That dynamic, where one star grinds through the season while another makes headlines during their absence, is the perfect recipe for bitterness, even among the most professional and mature athletes. History is filled with examples of partnerships and teammate relationships that cracked under far less strain than what Aaliyah Boston endured. We've seen it destroy championship cores, fracture locker rooms, and create irreparable divisions between players who were supposed to build something together. And Aaliyah had every legitimate reason to feel that strain weighing on her. She didn't just carry the scoring load night after night. She anchored the defense. She became the emotional stabilizer when frustration started creeping into the team. She fielded all the difficult questions from media about when things would turn around. She absorbed the disappointment from fans who expected more, and she did all of it without knowing when or if the situation would ease up, without any guarantee that help was coming or that the burden would eventually be shared again. That kind of responsibility changes people in profound ways. It hardens some players and makes them bitter. It isolates others and makes them withdraw. And in leagues where attention and recognition are already distributed unevenly, it often leads to quiet resentment that eventually leaks out in subtle ways through interviews, social media posts, or carefully placed comments that reveal underlying tension. But Aaliyah didn't crack under that pressure. Instead of turning inward and focusing solely on her own struggles, she leaned into leadership and put the team first. Instead of questioning why Caitlin's name kept dominating headlines and national conversations while she was doing the heavy lifting, she focused on doing exactly what the team needed from her in that moment. Instead of allowing difficult circumstances and an unbalanced situation to divide them or create distance between their relationship, she kept the partnership intact and refused to let resentment take root. That's what makes her reaction to the NBC deal so incredibly revealing and significant. Because support like that doesn't come from obligation or public pressure. It doesn't come from fear of backlash or worrying about how it will look if you don't say something. It comes from genuine perspective and emotional maturity. Aaliyah understood something that many professional athletes struggle to accept throughout their entire careers. Success isn't always symmetrical or fair. Impact isn't always rewarded evenly, and the attention doesn't get distributed based on effort or sacrifice. And just because someone else is getting opportunities and recognition doesn't mean yours are being stolen or taken away from you. She could have looked at the NBC situation and thought to herself, I'm the one who held this team together when everything fell apart. I'm the one who showed up every single night. Where's my national recognition? She could have quietly distanced herself from Caitlin's success and chosen to focus only on her own narrative. She could have taken the safe route of neutrality, saying nothing at all and avoiding the conversation entirely. Instead, she chose immediate and genuine enthusiasm, and that choice reveals everything about her character and mindset. Professional sports don't reward fairness or good intentions. They reward impact, and that's a truth every athlete learns eventually. But not everyone accepts it the same way or processes it with the same level of maturity. For some players, that reality becomes a source of motivation that pushes them to elevate their game and find ways to expand their influence. For others, it turns into quiet frustration and bitterness that never really goes away, that colors how they view their teammates' success and shapes their public behavior in subtle but noticeable ways. Aaliyah Boston has been in the league long enough to understand that fundamental difference. She knows that attention naturally gravitates toward flash and spectacle. She knows that scoring from 30 feet attracts cameras and generates viral moments in ways that dominant post play and interior defense never will. She knows that narratives don't always reflect effort, responsibility, or the grinding work that actually wins games. And she knows that when one player becomes the face of something bigger than the sport itself, when they transcend their league and become a cultural phenomenon, comparisons become unavoidable, no matter how unfair they might feel. That's exactly why her reaction to Caitlin's NBC deal carries so much weight and significance. Because if anyone in the entire WNBA had a legitimate reason to feel overshadowed, overlooked, or undervalued, it was Aaliyah Boston. She does the work that doesn't go viral on social media. She carries burdens that don't trend on Twitter. She played through an entire season where the margin for error was razor thin and every loss felt magnified. And yet, when Caitlin Clark crossed another major milestone and reached a level of recognition that no active WNBA player has ever achieved, Aaliyah didn't frame it as evidence of imbalance or unfairness. She didn't treat it as something that needed to be qualified or contextualized. She framed it as progress, as proof that the ceiling for what's possible is higher than anyone previously thought. That mindset doesn't come from naivety or not understanding the situation. It comes from deep personal security and confidence. Aaliyah knows exactly who she is as a player. She knows what she brings to the floor every single night. She knows her value doesn't depend on Instagram likes, ESPN segments, or how many times her name gets mentioned in national conversations. That self-assurance, that unshakable belief in her own worth, allows her to celebrate someone else's success without interpreting it as a threat to her own standing. And that's precisely where so many other players in the league struggle and fail. In an environment where opportunity has historically been limited, where media coverage feels scarce, and where breaking through to mainstream recognition seems nearly impossible, success can feel like a finite resource that's running out. When one player receives what appears to be disproportionate attention, others instinctively fear being left behind, forgotten, or permanently relegated to secondary status. That fear, that anxiety about being overlooked, naturally turns into comparison and scorekeeping. Comparison turns into quiet resentment that builds over time, and resentment slowly shapes behavior in ways that become visible to everyone watching, even when players think they're being subtle about it. Aaliyah Boston broke that destructive cycle completely. Instead of seeing Caitlin's NBC deal as something that highlighted inequality or proved the system is rigged, she saw it as something that fundamentally expanded the ceiling for everyone in women's basketball. Because once one door opens at that level, once one player proves they belong in spaces that were previously closed, it becomes exponentially harder to keep those doors shut for others. Networks start thinking differently. Sponsors start investing differently. The entire perception of what's possible shifts. That perspective, that ability to see beyond immediate comparisons and understand the bigger structural picture, separates true leaders from people who are simply talented competitors. Leaders understand that visibility is contagious and compounds over time. When one player breaks through barriers and achieves something unprecedented, it doesn't just benefit them individually. It raises expectations and possibilities across the entire sport. It changes how networks view the league's potential. It changes how major brands think about investment opportunities. It fundamentally changes what becomes conceivable for the next generation. Competitors who are trapped in insecurity and zero-sum thinking don't see any of that. They see attention as something finite, something that gets divided up, and they believe that recognition given to someone else is automatically recognition taken away from them. That belief, that scarcity mindset, slowly erodes collaboration and poisons team culture in ways that become impossible to fix. Aaliyah didn't fall into that trap, and her reaction to the NBC announcement suggested something much deeper than just being a good teammate. She genuinely understands that Caitlin's success doesn't erase her own achievements or diminish her value. It complements what she brings. It strengthens the foundation they're both standing on. It creates a rising tide that lifts everyone associated with the Indiana fever. That's an exceptionally rare level of clarity and maturity in an environment that's fueled by constant comparison, social media metrics, and competition for limited spotlight. And it directly exposes the deep insecurity behind so much of the league's silence and discomfort. Because if celebrating Caitlin Clark feels difficult or threatening, it's not because the achievement itself isn't genuinely impressive or historic. It's because acknowledging it forces people to confront uncomfortable truths about hierarchy, influence, market value, and who actually moves the needle in meaningful ways. Aaliyah didn't shy away from that confrontation or pretend it didn't exist. She met it head-on with confidence and did so in a way that felt completely effortless and natural. That effortlessness, that ease with which she supported Caitlin, is what made her reaction feel so powerfully authentic. No bitterness seeping through, no subtle qualifiers designed to protect her own standing, no passive-aggressive undercutting disguised as support, just pure, unfiltered confidence in both herself and her teammate. The reaction from fans didn't take days or weeks to build momentum. It was instant and overwhelming. As soon as Aaliyah Boston's post hit social media timelines, the contrast became impossible for anyone to ignore. While official league voices hesitated and veteran player reactions stayed conspicuously muted, fans locked onto the moment with a clarity and understanding that the WNBA itself seemed completely to lack. Because to fans watching from the outside, this wasn't complicated political maneuvering or something that required careful navigation. They didn't see hierarchy games being played. They didn't see ego, management, or territorial protection. They didn't see someone trying to position themselves strategically for future opportunities. They saw one star genuinely supporting another without conditions, qualifiers, or hidden agendas. And that felt incredibly refreshing in a space that's been dominated by visible tension, passive aggression, and exhausting debates for far too long. For years now, WNBA fans have been pulled into conversations and arguments that felt draining rather than inspiring, that sucked energy out of the room instead of building excitement. Endless debates about who deserves attention and recognition. Arguments over who's being artificially pushed by media versus who's being systematically ignored despite their contributions. Constant framing that pits players against each other, that treats success as something that has to be redistributed rather than expanded, that makes every achievement feel like it comes at someone else's expense. Aaliyah's reaction cut straight through all that accumulated noise and negativity. Fans immediately recognized it as genuine because it didn't feel calculated for maximum engagement or carefully workshopped to appeal to different audience segments. There was no brand-safe corporate phrasing, no attempt to thread the needle and appeal to everyone while offending no one, no exhausting balancing act between offering praise while also deflecting or qualifying that praise to protect other feelings. It was clean, direct, confident, and most importantly, it felt honest in a way that resonated immediately. That honesty stood out dramatically because fans are completely tired of performative unity that feels hollow. They've seen too many moments where public support feels forced, arrives suspiciously late after everyone else has already weighed in, or rings completely hollow because you can sense the reluctance behind it. They know instinctively when something is being said because it's socially expected rather than genuinely felt. This wasn't that. The response online across every platform reflected that immediate recognition. Comments didn't just praise Caitlin for the achievement, they praised Aaliyah for how she handled it. They called her a real teammate, a true leader, someone secure enough in herself to celebrate without needing to turn the moment into a comparison or make it about herself. And just as importantly, just as tellingly, fans noticed with crystal clarity who didn't say anything at all. Silence doesn't go unnoticed in the age of instant reaction and constant social media presence. When a moment this significant happens, when a player achieves something historic that elevates the entire sport, and familiar voices who are usually vocal about everything suddenly disappear from the conversation, people don't need official explanations to draw their own conclusions. Fans aren't naive. They understand patterns of behavior. They've watched carefully over the past 2 years how Caitlin Clark has been treated since entering the league. They've seen how praise for her accomplishments is almost always followed by qualifiers and disclaimers. How achievements get met with hesitation rather than enthusiasm. How genuine excitement gets systematically dampened by exhausting debates about fairness, media bias, and whether attention is being distributed equitably instead of simply being amplified by shared pride in what someone accomplished. So, when Aaliyah Boston broke that frustrating pattern so naturally and immediately, it felt like a genuine breath of fresh air. It reminded fans why they fell in love with sports in the first place, why they invest emotional energy into following teams and players. Not for the politics and resentment, not for watching talented people tear each other down, but for moments of shared joy, mutual respect, and witnessing excellence being celebrated without conditions or asterisks attached. And that matters far more than the league's leadership might currently realize or want to acknowledge, because fan sentiment shapes narratives faster and more powerfully than any official messaging or carefully crafted PR campaign ever could. When supporters rally around authenticity and genuine character, it exposes how disconnected and out of touch institutional behavior has become. It highlights the growing gap between what people actually want to see and what they're being given by the league's culture. Aaliyah's reaction didn't just support Caitlin Clark in a moment of achievement. It aligned her completely with the fans, with what they value, with what they're hungry for. An alignment with your fan base carries tremendous power that extends far beyond one social media post. It builds lasting loyalty. It strengthens trust between players and supporters. It shifts perception in ways that change how people view you as a person, not just as an athlete. In that single moment, Aaliyah wasn't just a talented player reacting to teammate news. She became a symbol of what fans desperately wish the entire league would embrace and embody more consistently. Open, confident, secure, and completely unafraid to celebrate excellence without conditions, without qualifications, without worrying about who might feel threatened. At face value, it was just a quick Instagram reaction that took seconds to post. But in context, considering everything happening around it, it was a powerful statement about priorities and values. Aaliyah Boston didn't just congratulate her teammate on a career milestone. She modeled what true professionalism looks like when ego gets removed from the equation entirely. She showed that you can be an elite star without needing to be the center of every single story. She proved that real leadership doesn't require long speeches or grand gestures. It requires clarity, confidence, and the courage to do what's right, even when others choose the easier path of silence. Caitlin Clark's NBC deal wasn't controversial. The reaction to it was, and Aaliyah's response quietly but definitively separated confidence from insecurity, progress from resistance, and genuine leadership from performative noise. The Indiana Fever didn't just draft 2 elite basketball players with incredible talent. They drafted 2 people who are actually capable of building something sustainable together. 2 stars who genuinely understand that shared success is more powerful and more valuable than individual validation could ever be. That's rare. That's incredibly valuable. And that's exactly how winning cultures get formed and maintained. If this partnership stays intact and continues developing, the Fever's future isn't just bright on paper. It's stable, it's authentic, and it's built on a foundation that most franchises spend decades searching for and never find. If you appreciate seeing professionalism win over jealousy, real leadership triumph over insecurity, and teammates actually supporting each other instead of competing for validation, make sure you hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below with your honest thoughts on the Fever's future, with this dynamic duo leading the way. And subscribe to this channel because we break down what's really happening in basketball beyond the surface level headlines and the endless noise. We'll see you in the next one.